Excellent. Well, I'm glad to see so many of you joining us this evening. I'm just going to do Rob Lyman's normal sort of waffly bit at the beginning while you're all getting yourselves comfortable, as he says, and your glasses of tea, coffee, wine, whatever takes your fancy while we're waiting for everybody to join us. We've got a lot of people registered tonight, which is wonderful. And I am actually looking forward to this enormously, as I know you will be. So, good evening, everyone, and welcome to another KET webinar. We are delighted as ever that so many of you are joining us this evening, when it is my pleasure to introduce tonight's subject, the wonderful Kohima Museum. For those of you not familiar with this fantastic and unique museum, you are in for a treat. And for those of you who have visited it many times, like myself, and think you know it all it has to tell you, I think you might be in for a surprise. The Kohima Museum is located inside Imphal Barracks in York. It was started in 1989, and it commemorates the Burma Campaign with particular focus on the Battle of Kohima. The museum was founded by the British 2nd Division and initially concentrated on the part that it played in the Battle of Kohima. But more recently, the scope of the museum has been broadened, and its aim is to try and encompass all of the Burma Campaign during the Second World War. Contained within its walls lie the most fascinating collection of artifacts, maps, paintings, weapons, badges, diaries, and photographs. Most of the exhibits were donated by Kohima veterans and their families, and I'm sure there are many of you watching tonight who have given a family treasure or two into their safekeeping. Presenting tonight is Dr. Bob White, who is soon to be curator of the Kohima Museum. Bob will be its 5th curator when he takes over from the indomitable Bob Cook, who has performed this role for over 15 years. And who has helped to make the museum what it is today. Dr. Bob White was educated at the University of Oxford, and for 40 years he has worked in biotechnology and cancer research, culminating as chair of biochemistry at the University of York, where he has more recently enjoyed both teaching and research. But Bob has always had a lifelong interest in military history and is thrilled to be invited to take over the curatorship when Bob Cook retires. Bob White's father was in the 25th Dragoons and was wounded at the Battle of the Admin Box, described by Lord Slim as the turning point in the Burma Campaign. So he also holds a deep personal interest. We are without Rob Lyman tonight, as he is currently in Kohima leading a group through some of the battlefields. These trips are organised by Sampan Travel and well worth looking out for if you are wanting to visit the area. As always, please feel free to use the chat facilities. And of course, if you have questions, please go to the Q&A button where we can pick them up at the end, if we're able, or after the event, when we will certainly reply to you via email. So enough from me. Over to you, Bob. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sylvia. So, most of the British troops who fought in the Battle of Kohima belonged to the 2nd British Infantry Division. And before the 2nd Division was sent out to India in 1942, it had been based in and around York. When the war ended, the division didn't return to the UK. Instead, it was posted to West Germany, where it remained as part of the British Army of the Rhine throughout the Cold War. And it wasn't until 1983 that the 2nd Division finally came back to its home in Yorkshire. There was a big parade to welcome it, and the division was inspected by Queen Elizabeth II. She took the opportunity to talk to some of the Kohima veterans of 2nd Division who were present that day. And it became a tradition that each year there would be an annual reunion of the veterans to remember the battle and their part in the Burma Campaign. At these reunions, which were held in Imphal Barracks in York, many of the veterans would bring with them souvenirs of their time in Burma that they'd brought back at the end of the war. They'd bring these along to show each other. And as the years rolled on, more and more of them left these objects at the Imphal Barracks for safekeeping, until in the year 1990, these artifacts were put on permanent display as a museum. And that is how the Kohima Museum came into existence. And the man responsible for creating the museum was Robin McDermott, the museum's first curator. And I think he deserves a huge amount of credit for that act of inspiration. He gained accreditation for the museum and served then as curator for some years. So the core of the collection actually are items that were brought back from Burma by the Kohima veterans themselves. But since then, we've added quite a lot of additional objects. So now we have 2,750 accessioned items, only a fraction of which are actually on display. A large proportion are in storerooms simply because we don't have the space to show everything. I found in one of our storerooms this board, which was used in 1884 by the Kohima veterans. And many of them signed this board and also wrote down which unit they had been part of. There are approaching 150 names here, and I found signatures of men from all 11 infantry battalions that composed the 2nd Division, as well as many of the support units, such as the Royal Artillery, the Royal Engineers, and the Signals. It's not really much to look at, but many of our visitors are relatives of Kohima veterans. And my thought process was that it would be nice for them to see if they can find their relative's signature here. When they framed this, they included a newspaper cutting that refers to a new Battle of Kohima painting. And that painting has become quite famous. It is the tank on the tennis court that was painted by Terence Cuneo in 1981. Cuneo was a prolific English painter who produced hundreds of paintings of battle scenes and railways. And he had the rather charming idiosyncrasy of including in his paintings a mouse hidden within the scene. And visitors often enjoy searching the painting to see if they can find the mouse. So this painting is now belongs to the Kohima Museum and is in pride of place on one of our walls. What it is depicting is a famous moment in the Battle of Kohima on May 13th, which took place at a tennis court which was located on a terrace that belonged to the Deputy Commissioner, Charles Pawsey. So he lived in a bungalow at the tip of Kohima Ridge, and behind his home there was a garden built on a series of terraces, and on one of those terraces was a tennis court. And the tennis court became the scene of some of the most unrelenting fighting throughout the Battle of Kohima. At some points, the British and Japanese were dug in within 20 yards of each other, the width of a tennis court. When the British were trying to drive the Japanese from Kohima Ridge, the very last place they held out was on this terrace with the tennis court. Multiple infantry attacks failed to dislodge them. They had a series of bunkers there, and the infantry just couldn't move them. So it was decided that the only way to get them out was using a tank, which had proven to be a very effective way of destroying the bunkers. The tank would drive up to within 15 yards and then use its large 75mm gun to blast the bunker straight through the aperture. And that worked extremely well, as one can imagine. These astonishing photographs are from a piece of newsreel that was actually filmed at the time. On the day of this attack, it shows that very tank on the terrace with the tennis court. What proved a particular challenge in this case was that there was no way that a tank could gain access to this terrace from below. So the engineers came up with a way of dragging the tank up onto the terrace above the one with the tennis court with the help of a winch and a bulldozer. And then on May 13th, this tank drove right off the edge of the terrace above and dropped 10 feet down onto the terrace below. The tank commander was a Sergeant Jerry Waterhouse, and he recorded, "I remember my driver shouting, 'Hold on!' and bump. We're smack in the center of the tennis court itself. We crashed right on top of one of the Japanese main positions and buried at least a few Japanese." I imagine that bump is something of an understatement for the crash that must have resulted from a 28-ton tank dropping 10 feet through the air. The jarring must have been incredible. I'm sure these tanks didn't have a lot of suspension, but the crew responded quickly enough that they could go into action, and 2 platoons of Dorset's 2nd Dorset Battalion rushed down from the terrace above, primarily to protect the tank against suicide attacks by Japanese. The tank blasted the various bunkers, and then, having done this to make sure that no one was left alive inside, the infantry would use pole charges. And there's a very good representation of 2 soldiers with pole charges in the middle of the painting. So a pole charge was a bamboo pole, and on one end was strapped about 10 pounds of explosives with a short fuse. They'd light the fuse, shove that end in through the aperture of a bunker, just to make sure that there was nobody left inside alive. And I think that the picture shows that very, very clearly. One of the Dorsets recorded, you could still see that it had been a tennis court. There was nothing like a net, but I could still see 1 or 2 white lines. One of the latest acquisitions of the Kohima Museum is this tennis racket. A lady visited us and donated this racket, which had belonged to her father, who had been an officer in the Royal Army Medical Corps, who had been stationed in one of the hospitals at Kohima before the invasion. And he told his daughter that he had used this very tennis racket to play on the Deputy Commissioner's tennis court. which is a nice story. We don't have any hard evidence to support it. We don't have a photograph of him with his arm around Charles Pawsey, unfortunately, but the story behind it is very nice, and we're considering whether or not to put it on the wall. This famous painting was made by James Ferry, who was the architect who was responsible for designing the famous 2nd Division Memorial. You will recognize the Naga monolith on which is inscribed the Kohima epitaph. Behind the monolith is a semicircle of 13 bronze panels on which were the names of all the casualties, the killed in action of the 2nd Division. In 1974, it was noticed that 3 of these 13 bronze panels had been stolen. So the decision was made that to preserve the remainder, they would be removed from the memorial, and instead stone panels were placed there with the same lists of names. The surviving 10 panels were sent to Britain, and 9 of them were distributed to regimental bases from the units relevant to the units that are described on the panels, whilst the 10th panel is displayed on one of the walls at the Kohima Museum. This is the headquarters panel. It has the names of casualties from headquarters, and it includes the 2 brigadiers of 4th Infantry Brigade who were killed during the battle. It also has names of some other units, including the Royal Army Service Corps, the Royal Army Medical Corps, and the engineers. We don't have a record of where the other 9 panels are. And I'd be very interested to hear if any of you know of the location of any of those and could send a photograph. It'd be great to receive these. I'd like to put them on the museum's website. The museum has the war diaries of all the units that fought at Kohima on the Allied side for the period of the battle, so April, May, June of 1944. And they're out, accessible to all visitors to open and browse, and this allows you to look up what any particular unit was doing on any particular day of the battle. And this is what they look like inside. And the example I've shown here is from the war diary of the 1st Queensland Cameron Highlanders for the 14th of April, 1944. You can see that on that day, the Camerons were at Zabza, which is between Dimapur and Kohima. And the advance towards Kohima was prevented by a roadblock that had been put there by the Japanese and which was heavily defended. And on the 14th of April, the Camerons attacked that roadblock and were able to break through. They finish by concluding, attack completely successful, over 30 Jap bodies found. But they also note some Cameron casualties as well, one of whom was Lance Sergeant Robert Hannay, a chap from Glasgow who had only recently been married. His wife, Ellen, was shattered by the news of her husband's death and never really recovered. She never remarried and many times visited Kohima to see her husband's grave at the war cemetery in Kohima. And then when she died, she got special permission to have her ashes scattered on his grave. We have, courtesy of her nephew, the very letter that she received notifying her of her husband's death. I find this a very moving artifact. I think of this poor woman staring at this letter and her whole hopes and dreams turning to dust. It was really a shattering moment for her. On a lighter note, the museum has some very nice model tanks and aircraft. And I think my favorite is this universal carrier, often referred to as a Bren gun carrier. It's fabulous in terms of all the detail you can see. But I also, whoops, didn't mean to do that. What I also like is the fact that it has this crossed keys emblem on its front bumper. And I was able to find a contemporary photograph of a universal carrier with the cross keys symbol in exactly the same place. This one seems to be having a few problems parking. On the 25th of February 1945, the 2nd Division crossed the mighty Irrawaddy River, the biggest river in Burma, as part of the drive by 14th Army towards Mandalay. And the plan for that crossing, it was planned very carefully, of course, was made by General Nicholson, who was commanding the division at that time. And we are privileged to have the original map that they produced on which the operation was carefully planned. I love the fact that it has written in the top corner, top secret. There's something, I think, rather schoolboy about that. If we look a little closer, you can see that the plan involved the use of the universal carriers, like the one I just showed you, with their crossed keys symbols. And you can see that they were to then drive down this road onto a road that was marked as only being commenced the night of the attack. So obviously they didn't want to give any advanced warning to the Japanese of what the plan was. And if you follow this road round, it says, all carriers launch here. And goodness me, you see these big arrows indicating that the carriers are to go straight into the water. This is not because the Irrawaddy is a shallow river, anything but. It was because they had found a way of making these armored vehicles amphibious by attaching to them 6 empty 45-gallon oil drums. And these turned out to be sufficient to make the carriers buoyant. Really quite extraordinary, I think. Airfix is a famous manufacturer of military models, aircraft, tanks, ships, beloved by schoolboys. I spent many an hour as a schoolboy drooling over Airfix catalogues. In 2014, the Airfix magazine brought out a plan to show you how you could convert your model of a universal carrier into an amphibious version so that it was then ready to cross the Irrawaddy. And there are pages of details on how to make this conversion. And when they'd finished, they were kind enough to donate it to the Kohima Museum. And here it is. It's very fine, I think. And you can see it's a pretty close replica of the amphibious carrier depicted in this image. I think it's a lot of fun. That issue of the Airfix magazine also had a special feature about the Battle of Kohima that was written by the famous Bob Cook, the ubiquitous fourth curator of the Kohima Museum, whom I'm sure many of you will know and love. On one of the walls at the Kohima Museum, we have this flag which belonged to the 4th Battalion of the Queen's Own Royal West Kents, who I'm sure you know formed a key part of the garrison during the siege of Kohima when the 1,500 British and Indian troops were surrounded by 15,000 Japanese. The flag was originally blue, and you can see it's very badly faded, but we can still clearly see the white horse of Kent, along with the Kentish motto, Invicta. Invicta means unconquered, and it seems to me very apt as a motto for this for the Royal West Kents at Kohima, since, as I'm sure you will know, they resisted all attempts to conquer them. I would really like to know whether this flag was actually flying during the siege or whether it was folded up in a bunker somewhere safe. And if anyone has any information on that point, I'd love to hear about it. My colleagues think it would have been shot to pieces if it had been flying, but I like to think of it there. We also have this flag that was captured by Captain Jack Randall, who of the 2nd Norfolks, who went on to win a posthumous Victoria Cross. The flag was captured from the Indian National Army, who fought alongside the Japanese with the aim of driving the British out of India. In the center of the flag, there is a loom. It's quite faded, but you can see it in a close-up much more clearly. And I found a photograph on the internet of Japanese and Indian troops waving a flag just like this, cheering about something or other. I also found this flag in a piece of Japanese propaganda. It's a fine cartoon. You can see a column of goose-stepping malcontents led by somebody carrying the Indian National Army flag, who has booted a gentleman whom I take to be British because he was wearing top hat and tails. And if there was any doubt, the top hat has a Union Jack on it. I'm told that the writing is in Urdu and Hindi and can be translated as, "This is your opportunity, it will never come again." This is your opportunity to be rid of the British, is the message. This is one page of a booklet of 20 pages. We also have a number of these splendid Japanese Yosagaki Hinamaru flags. The Hinamaru refers to the rising sun in the center, and the word Yosagaki refers to all the writing. These were not unit flags. These were personal flags carried by individual soldiers. So the practice was that when a young Japanese was going off to war, his family would either buy or make a Japanese flag. I think this one looks homemade to me. You can see that the color has run quite badly. And then they, the family, the friends, and the colleagues would write messages across the flag all around the rising sun. And you can see that the writing is in all different sizes and different hands. And this was intended to bring good luck and to give the soldier a connection with home. I don't have a translation of this writing. When Japanese have visited the museum, they've said that it can be rather difficult to translate, that some of the symbols have changed since the 1940s. But these, I found some examples of slogans on flags like this on the website of the National Army Museum. So they include bellicose, patriotic slogans such as defeat the US and the UK, and then rather more bizarrely to our way of thinking, beautiful death with honor and loyalty, reflecting the fact that these poor young men were brainwashed into believing that their highest destiny would be to perish on the battlefield. These flags made great souvenirs for Allied troops, and there are lots of photographs of British, Indian, and American soldiers holding up flags such as these. This famous picture is of a group of Royal Scots from 2nd Division with one of these flags. Allied soldiers knew that if they came across a dead Japanese, there was a good chance that he would have one of these flags, often folded up in his helmet, and they made great souvenirs. They were easy to carry, and lots of soldiers took them home with them. But I think they're really very poignant because of what they represent, all the hopes and well wishes of his friends and family, and maybe somewhere in all this writing there's a message from the chap's mum, which is a sad thought, I think. In 1992, the museum was visited by a group of Kohima veterans from the 31st Division of the Imperial Japanese Army. And they were hosted by veterans of the British 2nd Division, who took them to the Kohima Museum and were very interested to know what they thought about seeing these Yosagaki Hinamaru flags. And the answer was they were grateful. They thanked their hosts for treating the flags with respect and keeping them in a place of honor. And that is very much what we aim to do. We don't see them as trophies so much as memories of some of the fallen soldiers. We have a fine collection of Japanese Army rank insignia, going right from private up to Lieutenant General. Also, the insignia of a Japanese naval commander, and of a lieutenant colonel in the Indian National Army, which I imagine is quite a collector's piece. We have a Japanese carbine that was captured in a night ambush as the 2nd Division was heading east towards Mandalay. The carbine is a shorter and lighter version of the standard Japanese rifle, which most infantry carried. And both these weapons had been in production since 1905. So these certainly weren't the latest technology. They were popular. The carbines were popular amongst the Japanese because they were lighter and being shorter, they were easier to handle, particularly in the jungle. We have a Japanese hand grenade, which looks a little different from British and American hand grenades, which we're used to seeing. Primarily in that it has at one end this brass protuberance. There would have been a safety pin, just as Allied hand grenades had. Our grenade doesn't have a safety pin, but this is a picture of one belonging to the Imperial War Museum, and you can see its safety pin there. So you'd pull out that safety pin, and then to ignite the grenade, it was necessary to strike this brass protuberance against a solid surface, such as the ground, or commonly they used their helmets. They would actually bang themselves on the top of the head as long as they were wearing a helmet at the time. And the British troops learned to recognize the sound of a hand grenade being struck against a metal helmet, and knew that when they heard it, it was time to duck and take cover. The grenades had a 4-second fuse, which wasn't very reliable. So if you heard that sound, it was time to get out of the way. Once ignited, the grenade would emit black smoke and also a speck of blue light, which sometimes allow people at night to see the trajectory of the grenade and where it was coming from, which was very, very useful information, of course. I found this recollection of a infantry soldier, a private, who recalled how when going into an attack, they would take a handful of these grenades and pull out all of the pins first to save time, and then put them in our pockets, knowing we could self-detonate. So then all they needed to do was bounce the grenades. He said that his practice was to bounce it against the sole of his shoe rather than his helmet. It seems extraordinary to me that this dangerous practice would get signed off by the Health and Safety Department of the Imperial Japanese Army. We have a fine example of a Japanese 70mm howitzer. This is referred to as a battalion gun because 2 of these, at least in principle, was issued to every infantry battalion, and they were taken with the battalion and used as infantry support. If available, they'd use mules or horses to pull the gun, but often they had to resort to teams of men dragging it along, and you can see a picture of some guys doing that. It was operated by a crew of 4 or 5 and could fire, the barrel's very short, but it could nevertheless fire shells over 3,000 yards. and maintain a rate of fire of 10 rounds per minute. There are 2 wheels to adjust the traverse and elevation of the gun in order to aim it. We have a Japanese infantry uniform. It's very plain and functional. The most interesting feature, I think, are the jungle boots, which many Japanese infantry wore with these cloven toes, which was apparently a way of improving the grip in the jungle for climbing trees and, of course, going through muddy monsoon conditions as well. We also have some British uniforms. I'm just going to show you one of those. This belonged to Major White of the Queen's Own Cameron Highlanders. Major White is no relation of mine, despite our shared surname. We have some very fine examples of trench art. This empty shell case has a beautiful impression of the badge of the 14th Army on it. Here's another one, again with the 14th Army badge, as well as the crossed keys of 2nd Division, and then at the bottom, the emblem of the Reconnaissance Corps. So we assume that this was made by a member of the 2 Recce Battalion, which was part of 2nd Division. Here's one which we can assume was produced by a member of the 2nd Battalion Royal Norfolks. It's got Royal Norfolks written on one side, and on the opposite side, there's this beautifully detailed engraving of Britannia appearing just as she does on the Royal Norfolk's cap badge. Underneath, he's scratched 2nd Battalion GPT Ridge Kohima, 4th of May, 1944. 4th of May was the day that the Royal Norfolks stormed onto GPT Ridge. They had gone through this right hook march through dense jungle. It had taken getting on for a week, I think, and was extremely hard work, and was intended to take the Japanese behind by surprise by appearing behind the GPT Ridge, and in that it was successful, and they made very good progress along the ridge, although failed to capture it completely. There were too many bunkers. I'll show you just one more example. We've got others, but this one I like. For one reason, it was light enough that I could put it on my rotating platform. It was presumably made by a gunner, as it has the emblem of the Royal Artillery, as well as the crossed keys of 2nd Division. This is incredibly intricate, and I have no idea how they were able to make that. We have a piece of the wreckage from the plane crash that killed Major General Ord Wingate, the famous and charismatic architect of the Chindit long-range penetration units. So Wingate was killed in a plane crash returning from inspecting some Chindit bases. The plane crashed in Manipur on the 24th of March, 1944, killing everyone in the plane, him, the general, and 8 others. The bodies were recovered, but were in such a state that they couldn't be separated and identified clearly. So they were buried in a communal grave, which is in Arlington Cemetery, Virginia, because it was a US Air Force aircraft. Some years later, an archaeological dig found the wreckage of the plane and recovered some pieces of this, one of which was donated to the Chindit Society and a second piece donated to Kohima Museum. And we have this on display in remembrance of Ord Wingate, who was certainly a very influential figure in the Burma Campaign. On the subject of plane crashes, a Pointie-Talkie was a device that was intended to help aircrew who were crashed or forced to land in territory where they couldn't speak the native language. And the example we have is intended to allow British or American aircrew to communicate with Chinese whom they might meet. And the way it works is on each page, there would be sentences in English, and opposite them, the same sentence written in some form of Chinese. I can't tell you which form of Chinese this is. So if, for example, I met someone and wanted to tell him I am an English airman, I would point to this first sentence, and no doubt he would give me a thumbs up and offer me a cup of tea at the news. Then if we could communicate further by choosing appropriate sentences. For example, sentence 8, we could ask him, how many Japanese are there in this area? So you point to the Chinese translation of that sentence, and then you could offer him a choice of answers. He could answer that they are in force, there are not many of them, or there are none at all. And there are pages and pages of this with some really very detailed opportunities to extract information and find out all about exactly what situation you might find yourself in if your plane came down somewhere unintended. It's not printed on paper. Paper would turn to mush during the monsoon. It's instead printed on parachute silk, which was much more durable. The obvious limitation of this approach is that a lot of the people one might meet having crash landed are likely to be illiterate. And that really would stymie the device. So some versions included pictures. Ours doesn't. There are no pictures in the one the museum has, but I found on the internet an example of one that did have a picture, and this is it. It's showing the airmen fighting alongside some rebellious men who are clearly aiming to drive out the Japanese. So this was intended to communicate the fact that the airman was on the side of the people who don't like the Japanese. We have large numbers of aerial reconnaissance photographs. Most of them were taken at much higher altitude than this one, and most of them have no annotation. When I look at them, I really can't make head nor tail of them. They just look like trees to me. But this one is quite low level and benefits from having annotation. It says milestones 75.5 to 70. So what this is part of the Imphal Road, winding its way through the hills before coming out onto the Imphal Plain. And the date of that photograph is the 14th of June, 1944. So the 2nd Division was moving south from Kohima, trying to displace the Japanese and open up the Imphal Road. And obviously the aircraft were looking to see if there are any roadblocks or any Japanese troops in the path of the division. Now, this was taken just 8 days before the 2nd Division succeeded in opening the road where it met up with troops coming from Imphal at milestone 109. This picture, I think, is really interesting. It's clearly marked out as the Naga village at Kohima. And I was very struck. It's at the top of a hill, which is standard for Naga villages, but I was struck by the size of this village. To me, the word village implies maybe a dozen or a couple of dozen houses. But you can see this is quite a metropolis, and I found a record by where Charles Pawsey recorded that there were over 950 houses in the Naga village before the battle. So this was taken on the 15th of April. So the siege of Kohima was ongoing at the time. We know that the Naga village was occupied by large numbers of Japanese, and just the other side of this hill was Kohima Ridge, where the siege was going on. British and Indian troops were holding out against the surrounding Japanese until 3 days later, the 2nd Division arrived to relieve the garrison. At that point, the Allies went over onto the attack, and sadly, this village got pretty badly destroyed by British shelling and bombing. Here's a photograph of the Naga village after the battle, and this was necessary to displace the Japanese who were occupying that village. We have a very fine Naga spear pointed at both ends, and the shaft is decorated with dyed hair, which I presume is not human hair. I think it might have come from a goat. We also have an example of a Naga dao, which is their rather unusual sword. It's unusual in that the narrowest part of the blade is next to the hilt rather than distal to the hilt, which is more normal arrangement for a sword. The convex surface here is the cutting edge. The Nagas gifted General Grover, commander of 2nd Division in 1944, with this very fine walking stick, which you can see him holding in this rather famous photograph. This very walking stick was donated to the museum by General Grover's son, and you can see it on display. It's our first accessioned item, item 0001. And we keep it in a cabinet that we refer to as the Grover cabinet, that contains a variety of objects relating to General Grover. I was very pleased last year when we were visited by Mrs. Celia Grover, the daughter-in-law of the general, and here's a photograph I took of her standing in front of the Grover cabinet. And you can see behind her left shoulder, there's the general's diary, which we keep open at June the 22nd, 1944, which was the day that the Battle of Kohima is considered to have ended. It was the day that the Imphal Road was finally opened. So the general's entry for that day opened Imphal Road, and then he notes down the units involved. So it was the 2nd Durham Light Infantry of 6th Infantry Brigade of 2nd Division, and they met up with the 1st 17th Dogras of the 5th Indian Division, who were coming north from Imphal. And this famous photograph shows this meeting, and it occurred at milestone 109. And then the general notes that an hour and a half later, he had a meeting with the commander of 5th Division, this time at milestone 110. It's a really short, abrupt, undemonstrative entry for a momentous event. These men had been fighting for over 2 months, had shed buckets of blood, sweat, and tears to achieve this, and it gets this very terse, matter-of-fact record. We have the general's ceremonial sword, and also the sword of a Japanese infantry officer, which was surrendered to the general. We have about half a dozen swords belonging to Japanese infantry officers. Again, they were popular souvenirs. The last artifact that I'm going to show you is, in my view, one of the most important. It is a very fine suit, model of Japanese medieval samurai armor. And it was gifted to the courageous members of the 2nd British Infantry Division in 1984 by veterans of the Japanese 31st Divisions. They've noted down these were the friendly members of that division. It's a beautiful object in itself, but I also think it's very important as a symbol of reconciliation between these men who had been struggling to kill each other 40 years before, and for that reason, it has a very prominent place in the museum's collection. So this was originally given to the headquarters of 2nd Division, but the 2nd Division was disbanded, and at that point, this treasure was passed to the Kohima Museum, where we care for it. If you want to find out more about some of the items that I've described this evening, then you can do so by looking at the museum, the Kohima Museum's website. There's a page called Object of the Month, and some of the things that I've shown you, you will find there with further descriptions. There will also be some objects which haven't been included in this webinar. There will, as you might guess, I add a new object each month, and some that I've shown you this evening are not yet on this page, but will appear there in the months to come. Though I'm thinking of renaming it Treasures of the Museum, which I think sounds a bit more enticing. You may notice that there are lots of pages on the Kohima Museum website. There's a lot of information about the Battle of Kohima and other battles that were taking place in 1944. So do take a look. I want to finish by reminding you that this collection, this priceless collection, wouldn't be there without the huge amounts of time invested by the curators. So the museum has no paid staff. All the people who work there are volunteers, and it's the only museum in the UK dedicated to the Burma Campaign. So I think it's unique and very important. And the men who have spent so much time caring for these artifacts, I think, deserve a lot of credit. Beginning, of course, with Robin McDermott, who was the first curator and opened the museum in the first place. Robin is now one of the trustees of the Kohima Museum, and we always value his insights. So he served as curator for 7 years. Then John Jessup and Nigel McGrain each spent 6 years as curator. And then the fourth curator was the famous and ubiquitous Bob Cook, who, by my reckoning, has been in post for 17 years. Bob has told thousands of visitors about the Battle of Kohima in York, and also in tours in Kohima itself. So I think he deserves a great deal of credit for keeping the memory alive. For 12 years, he was greatly assisted by Brian Ward. Brian has not only an encyclopedic knowledge of the battle, but also has a gift for joinery, carpentry. He was very much responsible for the immaculate presentation of the display cabinets. Brian stepped back at the end of last year on reaching his 80th birthday, and he is greatly missed, although he pops in from time to make sure we're behaving ourselves. I will be the 5th curator, and I ask you for your support. Please support the Kohima Museum. As I already said, it is unique. It's the only museum in the UK dedicated to the Burma Campaign. We're open every Thursday morning to visitors, but if you can't make a Thursday morning, just get in touch and we will be happy to arrange a time for a visit, and I shall be very pleased to give you a personal tour. I love showing people around the museum, so don't be shy about asking. Good, thank you very much for listening. I will pass you over now to Sylvia.
Brilliant, Bob. Thank you so much for this fascinating window into the treasures that you house at the Kohima Museum. As I said at the beginning, I thought even those of you who have visited many times will see and hear something new this evening. I certainly did, as I had not seen General Nicholson's top secret hand-drawn map of the plans for the crossing of the Irrawaddy. My father, Gordon Graham, had done some of the recceing by plane beforehand, and it was he who led his company, among others, across the Irrawaddy that night of February the 25th. So that was quite amazing. And I do reiterate, if you guys haven't been to the museum, I hope tonight has whet your appetite. I think we'll take questions by email afterwards, as we haven't had our usual plug for the evening, because before you go, I do want to bring to your attention, lined behind me, this unique anthology which Bob Cook and Robin McDermott have compiled, entitled Soldier Poets of the 2nd British Infantry Division. It includes all the well-known poems which you would expect to find, such as No Tears, but also a large number of lesser-known writings, all from ordinary men, often under enormous duress and more frequently writing with a sense of loss of a comrade, none of whom would have donned a uniform if their country had not gone to war. It covers at least 2 years of the campaign, from the first Arakan to the end of the war, some also written after the war altogether. The book also contains interesting facts, photos, and, as they say, so much more. The Kohima Museum, as Bob has just said to you, is run voluntarily, so any copies purchased will go to benefit their work. You can also, though, of course, find copies available from us on our KET website online store, sales of which will benefit both the museum and KET. I just want to give you a quick update on something that we're launching in the UK now. I mentioned it briefly last time, but we have now launched a new programme of educational bursaries for Nagas living and studying in the UK. We've received several applications so far, but the closing date is not until the end of March, so we're expecting a few more. We plan to review and interview in April and May, with the final selection being announced in June. The application form is available on our website under the Projects tab, where you will also find more information about the programme. But please don't hesitate to get in touch with me should you want to know more, and we look forward to keeping you up to date at the end of June. In York, our commemoration service this year will be held on Thursday, June 26th at 11 AM in Dean's Garden, York Minster. Tickets will be available from the end of March, with the online booking form available on our website under events. And of course, it will be a wonderful opportunity to see the museum when you come up to Imphal Barracks. We'll also be holding an event in the evening prior to the service. Details for this will follow. And then the last slide, our next webinar, which I always like to plug to keep you informed, will be on Thursday, the 20th of March, when guest speaker Dr. Nigel Warwick, who is with us this evening, will take us through the RAF regiment in Burma and India and its operational history in SEAC. Dr. Warwick will be presenting from Canberra, where he lives, so it's going to be an early start for him, but normal time for us, 8 PM in the evening. And Rob Lyman, I'm pleased to say, will be back at the helm, and we look forward very much to seeing you all again. And I'll certainly be in touch, following up on your immense chat tonight. And Jerry will try and find the Dorset's plaque for you, and we'll be in touch. Look forward to seeing you and hearing next time. Bye-bye.